Welcome to the Beyond the Bestseller podcast. I'm your host, Kelly Schubnecht, and today's guest is Phyllis Leavitt, author of America in Therapy. Welcome, Phyllis.
Thank you so much for having me here, Kelly.
I'd love to start out by having you introduce yourself. Tell me about you and kind of where this book came from. Why did you write America in Therapy?
Yeah. Well, I have been a therapist for my entire professional career, over 30 years of working with families and children and couples and individual adults. And, a lot of what therapy is based on today is an understanding of how family systems work and that we're not islands, that we didn't just get born. I think we're born with our own individual natures, but a lot of who we become depends on the conditioning of the people we get from the people and the communities and the influences around us. So family systems has become a very central point in understanding ourselves. What did we learn about how to cope with conflict? What did we learn about what is success or failure? What did we learn about men and women? There's so many things we pick up in our families of origin in particular, and in our larger communities and family systems. And so it wasn't a far cry at some point to realize that our country is a family system as well. And is it a healthy family system? Does it treat everybody with love and respect and good boundaries and appreciation and rooting for us to become our best selves? Or are some people discriminated against? Do some people have a lack of resources that are withheld from them? Is there abuse and neglect in the family of America? Because we know that this happens so often in families of origin, and we understand so deeply from the field of psychology what the effects are on people when they're not treated with love and care and healthy boundaries and a commitment to nonviolence in particular. We know that people become highly symptomatic, and when they're treated that way in the collective, they also become highly symptomatic. And we see that in, so much escalating divisiveness and violence and discrimination
Mm.
and injustice, and in the huge economic inequality in our country today. And these are family dynamics, and that I really try to point them out in my book, not from the point of view of who to blame, but how do we heal? How do we help the family of America become a healthy, loving, safe family for all people and not just for some? And so that was really the birth of the book, was trying to take the principles of the best of what we know from healing family systems and bringing that to a national conversation.
I love that. So I'm curious about the title. I have two questions. I'm looking at the
Yeah.
book over your shoulder, so
Yeah.
listeners can't see it, but they can look it up. But our video watchers can see. So I have a question about the title and about the cover. I feel like the title, I mean, my own personal feeling is that the title should be America Needs Therapy. So what's the
Right.
connection? What's the
Right.
connection with the therapy piece in the book? And I guess is that the kind of the recommendation that you make that therapy is kind of this would not the solution, but like would help with the solution to the problem.
Absolutely. So the title of the book for anyone who doesn't have a video then is America in Therapy, A New Approach to Hope and Healing for a Nation in Crisis. And yes, I called it, and America Needs Therapy isn't a bad title either. The title and what the book really means is that, and this is my observation again as a psychotherapist of so many years, is that our mental health is actually the biggest missing piece from political conversation. We talk about right and
Mm.
wrong, we talk about good and bad, we talk about who's entitled and who's not, we talk about who has power and who doesn't and why, but we don't actually talk about our collective mental health. And one of the reasons why I see that and why I say, and it could be America Needs Therapy as well as America in Therapy. I called it America in Therapy because I'm visioning what it would be like if America were in therapy. So, in the outset of my book, I'm actually addressing the Statue of Liberty as the client. And that's just sort of a frame around the picture. And then I talk about what happens to people when they're mistreated and they don't get rescue and they don't get help. So that we know, what is the source of all these mass murders in our country? Why are we so bent on creating bigger weapons of mass destruction? Why are we so invested in war? Because we know on a mental health level in an individual family, people who are mentally well, who are loved, who feel safe, who feel that they have purpose and value, who belong, who are provided for, more or less, given that none of us do this perfectly, but more or less, people who grow up in that kind of a healthy, supportive, caring, safe environment don't want to kill each other. They don't want to discriminate. They don't want to commit violence or make somebody to blame for their problems. They're more willing and able to take responsibility for themselves and their own participation in larger and larger arenas of human relationships. So when we take that understanding of mental health and we look at our country, it's pretty clear that there are a lot of areas in our national functioning where we're not operating on the best mental health. And we're actually creating many, many victims who become highly symptomatic. So, again, I just want to point out that the purpose of the book isn't to blame anyone, it's to understand the roots of violence and divisiveness so we
Mm-hmm.
can correct them. And I know it's a tall order, and I know there's a lot of people who don't think it's possible. And I think that's very sad. It's understandable that I think as individuals, we often feel very powerless to change these big systems. Um, but we can advocate for them in our own lives, no matter how small we think our sphere of influence is. And we can live the values in our own lives and know that to the extent that we are able to embody healthy family dynamics and safe, loving human relationships with other people, there is a ripple effect.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mental health has always been something that I've always been very aware of the importance of mental health, and aware of the fact, I grew up in the Midwest, and there's a town in Iowa where there's like this big mental hospital that is no longer a mental hospital. I don't know what they did with it, but it used to treat people, right? And that, years ago when we were there, I remember thinking like, what happened to all those people, or what happens now to the people who need mental health services? And I am, I don't know, very I don't know, it's close to my heart, because I've never actually said any of this publicly, but my grandpa committed suicide, my uncle committed suicide, and my cousin committed suicide.
Wow.
And so I'm very aware that, and it was all mental health issues, right? Like there's depression there was obviously some things that um were not being treated, or maybe were being, I don't know, like I don't know what was going on, but that is something that um I don't know, like I'm very aware of, like I've myself have never gone to therapy, and I actually had on my list last year. Um, that was one of the things I was like, I should do that. I should go to therapy, like, because I think everyone should, right? Like I don't have depression or mental health issues that I'm aware of, but like I'm also aware that we should all be, it's like going to the gym, like it should be like a practice that you
Mhm,
have, that so do you
mhm.
make recommendations for people on where to get therapy, or how to seek therapy, or like what do you tell people, I guess just like what's your recommendation to people around getting therapy?
Well, the biggest motivator for most people to go to therapy is that they're in some kind of pain. Something isn't working in their life. They can't find the love they want. They're not getting along with their children. They can't find satisfying employment, or they feel like they have a well of creativity that isn't being expressed in the world, or, any one of a number of problems, including that they have memories of being mistreated, physical abuse, sexual abuse, um, gender abuse, racial abuse, and all these things are going on in many, many homes in America and in many communities in America. And so the biggest motivator is pain. It sounds like for you, you're looking to sort of like upgrade,
Yeah. Yeah. I
good.
would say all of those things you said, I'm like, that's why I've never done it because I'm like, I don't have any of those issues. But like, I'm also just aware that like, there's probably like I know I have a lack of self-confidence. I know like there's things that come up that I'm like I probably should talk to somebody about that. Like right, it's not like anything major, but it's just like things where I'm like I feel like I should explore some of this stuff going on that like would
Yeah.
help me get better. I like how you said that. Like it kind of upgrade my myself. I don't know.
Right. So psychotherapy is good for both. It's good for an upgrade, for like, I'm doing well, but I feel like there's more I could understand about myself, or there's
Yeah.
things I'd still like to address, like self-confidence, or, and which is really true for many people, that there really is an overt source of pain and discomfort and lack of fulfillment in their lives that is a huge motivator. And I think it's really important, whether they're coming from a place like you're describing or a place of, much more sort of trauma and urgency, that we really understand that it's not a sign of weakness to go to someone for help. We don't consider it a sign
Mm-hmm.
of weakness if we go to a car mechanic to fix our car, but somehow when it's about our emotional life, we feel like we should be able to do it ourselves.
There's a stigma
Pull
around
yourself
it for
up on
sure.
bootstraps. You're supposed to be more independent than that. It's not sexy to be vulnerable. Whatever it is we tell ourselves, and a lot of that is perpetuated culturally.
Mm-hmm.
It's really important to know that it actually takes strength and courage and perseverance to do any kind of real healing work, or exploratory work in our psyches. It takes courage, and because we're learning something new, most of us rely on what we already know. And if it's good enough, great. I mean, that's okay. You don't have to go to therapy. But if it's really not good enough and it's not working, it's really important to know that help is available and it changes people's lives. It changed my
Mm-hmm.
life. I did have trauma in my childhood, and going to therapy literally changed my life. So I want to say that to people, like, let yourself, you'd go to the doctor if you had an infection.
Mm-hmm.
Go to a therapist if your heart is hurting.
Well, and I do. So backing up, this was, and I didn't do it, Phyllis, but this was my on my list of last year, like things that I thought I could do to improve myself. But I was in like, yeah, I would say like I was unhappy in my career and like questioning like thinking I needed to think through it with somebody helping guide me, not like a career coach, but like a person who could
Right.
help me understand like why am I not happy here? Like what are the things that I need to I don't know, think about, but just helping me like reflect. And um, anyway, still it's on my list. But do you, I've heard of things like, oh, I can't think of, I think it's BetterHelp is like an online app for therapy, or are you aware of resources? Because I would imagine one of the barriers for therapy for people is often the cost. So are there resources out there that we can share in the show notes that you're aware of for getting therapy? I mean, whether or not it still costs money, but like, what are some of those ways that we can make it easier for people to find those resources?
I don't know them off myself offhand, but what I would say is there are now a number, and I don't even know how large the number is, of ways that you can just get therapy online. You don't have to leave your home. I think a lot of that really got initiated during COVID when people couldn't go out,
Mm-hmm.
go to an anonymous office somewhere. So I think probably all you would have to do is Google online therapy. And I know
Yeah.
there's a number of organizations, and hopefully some of them have a sliding scale or a range of pricing. But, if we're looking at America in therapy, because so many people really do need help to recover from whatever the deficits and the hurts have been in their life, that it should be part of our national agenda to
Mm-hmm.
provide that for people. And
Yep.
that's part of creating a healthy family in the family of America, providing the resources people need to heal and really addressing the causes of violence so there's less to heal from. It's sort of like if you looked at a car, you want to build a more efficient engine, and you certainly don't want to build one that blows up. So
Mm-hmm.
if a car engine blows up, yes, let's repair the damage, but then let's create an engine that doesn't blow up. And I would say the same thing for our mental health. Let's really help each other heal, and then look at the sources of family violence, of community violence, of economic violence, of gender violence, and all of the things that actually cause people to become mentally, impaired or hurting, and then require some kind of healing. So it's a
Mm-hmm.
multi-pronged approach. And
Yeah.
so for me, as a therapist, I really focused for my whole career on the individual level of that, the individual person, the individual couple, the individual family. And my book is all about just taking that whole model and expanding it out to our largest family systems so that we could actually address the root causes of violence and hatred and discrimination.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I mean, like I said, I think government resources have been cut around mental health. I don't know when that happened, but like I said, we used to have those mental health facilities that we don't have in the country anymore. I'm sure there's somewhere, but they're not as prevalent as they used to be. And it's just
Well, I
concerning that
actually
people.
researched a little bit. Excuse me, I didn't mean to
No,
interrupt.
yeah,
I was
go
just
for
going
it.
to say, I researched a little bit of that when I was in graduate school about the closing of these sort of more localized and state-run
Yeah.
facilities. Not that they were all great, but really the upshot of that was an uptick in homelessness, and that's
Mm,
really the sad
sure.
outcome. That so many of these people who desperately need help just don't get it, and they end up on the street and they end up homeless. And then, as a society, we blame them and shame them or look down on them as inferior when what they needed was help. I remember
Yeah.
reading a story when I was in graduate school about a woman who was in, some back ward of a state asylum. And fortunately, she had a really good psychiatrist who was able to really talk with her on a very deep level. And her story was that she had been molested since childhood. She wasn't sick. She wasn't deficient. She wasn't mentally ill. She was suffering from massive trauma. And I
Yeah.
think we really have to know that as a culture.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, my other question about your cover is the blue and the red, the design of it. So I'm curious about your inspiration behind the cover design.
Yeah, I had different images for my cover, but I ended up with that one partly at the advice of my publisher, who was basically, I guess there's sort of a trend in covers these days, which are fairly simple. Um, but I thought, red, white, and blue are the colors of our country, and those colors often have a negative association today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to change that association, that we could heal and we could still be red, white, and blue, and we could be red and blue together.
Yeah. Love it. Love it. Well, tell me about your writing process with this book. You mentioned your publisher. Did you have guidance through the writing process? Did you have the publisher before you wrote the book, or did you write it first and then find a publisher?
I wrote it first.
Okay.
I actually wrote a huge book on my own. I've been a writer all my life, and I have two previous books that are about my
Oh,
own healing journey. So I wrote this book on my own, and I just had like this collection of chapters, and I had a huge amount of material. And then I kind of got to a place where it's like, I don't know what to do with this. So I looked for a developmental editor, and I was very fortunate to find someone who was very gifted and very talented. And, I had one conversation with her that sold me on her immediately because she saw the vision for my book, and she actually saw beyond the vision of my book. And I ended up writing the whole book again from scratch, which I never thought I would do. Um,
Mm,
and and I had a lot of editorial guidance along the way, which I would really recommend for everybody, just because you can't see what you can't see, about your writing. You might have, I feel like I had great ideas, and I think many people do, but we don't necessarily know how to make the arc of a book. And I will say that it turned out to be a very different book than what I envisioned, and I'm glad. And I wrote chapters in this present book that I never would have written on my own had it not been for someone else intuiting where the arc of the book really needed to go. So, and
sure.
then after that, I found a publisher.
And how did you find your publisher?
Well, I had some help with writing, the whole query thing, that you send out. That's sort of a professional thing that you send out to publishers. And I looked for a hybrid publisher, partly because I'm not really known in the publishing world. I've had a private practice my whole life, and so my exposure is pretty small. So I looked for a hybrid publisher, partly because I thought that was a good choice, and I was advised that. And also because if you go for, and apparently this is what I was told, that if you go for like the big names, it's much harder to be accepted if you don't have like thousands of people in your following these days. But also,
Hmm.
the publishing timeline is really long. So you might be accepted by a big name publisher, but your book might not come out for 2 or 4 years. And I
Yeah.
didn't, so I looked for a hybrid publisher, and I was very fortunate to find someone who accepted my book pretty quickly.
Nice, nice. Well, that sounds like you had a great experience in that process, which, um, yeah, it sounds like you were very well supported through it. So that's
Very well,
great. Yeah,
very
yeah. Well, I will link to your book in the show notes. I will Google some therapy, online therapy kind of options for people, and
great.
I'll include that in the show notes as well. How else can listeners learn more about you or connect with you after the show?
Yeah, there's a couple of great ways. I have a website, which is my name, www.phyllisleavitt.com. And I have a lot of things on my website. I have other recordings of interviews that I've done. I have blogs. I have information, more and more information about the book America in Therapy. And you can buy it directly from my website or from any of the major booksellers like Amazon or Barnes and Noble and all of those. I have lots of videos on YouTube. I'm on LinkedIn. You can look for me on Substack. If you sign in on my website, for my newsletter, and try to write a newsletter every week, and I really try to make them substantive, like something, with a little meat in it. If you sign in for my newsletter, you will get a free copy of a PDF that I created about the principles of resolving conflict in a nonviolent, constructive way, that I've created. And you can also just email me at phyllis@phyllisleavitt.com. That's my business email address. So, and I'm happy to talk with anyone or share or, find out your story. So whatever.
All right. Well, thank you, Phyllis. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really been a pleasure talking with you.
For a community of women writers to support and inspire you on your journey, join the Author Power Circle. Connect weekly with fellow authors, stay accountable, and move your book forward in an encouraging community. Learn more at kellyshuckneck.com.